Welcome back to the Real News Network. We're in New York City at the United Nations with President of the General Assembly, Miguel Discoto. Thanks for joining us again.
Thank you.
About a year after the Iraq War, Kofi Annan said that the Iraq War was illegal. He made the statement. It took quite some time to say it, but he said it. There's been a lot of critique of the Security Council and the fact that the Security Council plays power politics, although around the Iraq War, it was one of the few times, actually, the Security Council didn't give the U.S. what they wanted. On the other hand, they did it anyway, and there seemed to be no repercussions. But I didn't see much coming from the General Assembly either. If you have a war that was illegal, isn't there also some mechanism and some responsibility on the General Assembly to have taken a position?
That is one of the reasons why failure to do that clear, unequivocal repudiation of things like the Iraq War, that is the reason why the United Nations has lost so much prestige and credibility. I do think it is up to the members. Countries are clear about that. They know this should be done, but they're afraid.
And this decade more or less began with September the 11th and the attacks on the Twin Towers. Your thoughts on this last 8-9 years and what it's meant particularly for the United Nations and international law?
Not only the decade, but the millennium, the century, began with this terrible terrorist attack on the Twin Towers. Now, that certainly was a bad thing that got the universal condemnation of mankind. It happened on the very anniversary of the bombing of La Moneda, the Chilean presidential palace, and the murder of President Allende, with the complicity, as has happened in many other occasions, of the United States. There are many consequences. Okay, so now they say, don't look back. Well, the present is a result of what's back.
You're referring to President Obama when he was in Trinidad.
Yeah.
I didn't come here to debate the past. I came here to deal with the future.
Obama did not invent that thing. President Obama did not. I've been hearing that for a long time. Don't refer to anything a minute ago because that's already passed. So talk about that which you don't know.
So there's never accountability.
There's no accountability. Another area is this area of the 5 Cuban heroes who are keeping unbelievably prison terms in the United States because they infiltrated not government agencies, but terrorists who work out of Miami. Miami has been one of the biggest terrorist havens in the world.
So just for people that don't know the background of the case, there are 5 Cuban intelligence officers. They infiltrated gangs in Miami.
In Miami. And
were arrested and are now in American jails.
And then that information that they gather was transmitted through due channels to the American authorities. Because they always claim they don't know anything about those things. Okay, so here it is, the information. And so the response was to incarcerate them in totally...
And this information was terrorist attacks being planned on Cuba.
Against Cuba, from Miami. Es una cosa increíble que sobre texto de una guerra contra el terrorismo a los más destacados los héroes antiterroristas los castiguen. This is very much uppermost in the mind of Latin America. It's an aberration of justice. Things like that doesn't take anything. It's a presidential decision. Mira, el presidente Obama que yo creo que él habla en serio cuando él dice que promete cambio y un cambio creíble. Él puede, sin necesidad de ir a ninguna tribunal, de inmediatamente corregir.
Candidate Obama, before he was president, said what was needed in the United States was a new mindset about foreign policy. Do you see a new mindset in U.S. foreign policy, and particularly at the United Nations?
That new mindset is easier said than done. President Obama has a very, I trust him. I really like President Obama. And I think that when he speaks, he really speaks about what he believes. And so I'm almost always in agreement. And not only that, I'm inspired to hear him speak that way.
Where have you seen him question some of the basic assumptions of U.S. foreign policy? Because and he says himself he's in the history of American pragmatic foreign policy, which really does begin with the assumption of U.S. power in the world. Does he question that?
He has, in Cairo he did, or at least some of the things that he did say imply at least a different perception of how things should be, which is not the same as to say a belief that he can change it immediately. The American mentality has been carefully developed over many, many years. If anyone dares to go too much against that, his political days as political leaders will be short-lived. You see the terrific opposition that he's getting on his health bill. And you see how they misconstrued purposely what he's trying to do. Those forces, reactionary forces, who were thrown at our countries in the third world that were looking for change, and then you have all of these forces, reactionary forces, they have been unleashed, I think, against President Obama. And I pray that God would give him the strength and would give the American people the ability, even though they have been indoctrinated differently for so long, the ability to hear. You see, because many of the things sound like criticism, and we think that those who dare to criticize us in any way are our adversaries. Wise are those people who humbly listen to their sincere critics. It's absolutely indispensable. Without that, we won't get anywhere. We must be open to self-criticism and to criticize from an ethical perspective what goes on around us. Having said that, without criticism, there's no progress. But criticism is the prerogative, or should be the prerogative, only of those who love. Those who love whoever or whatever they are criticizing. If we don't, we will exaggerate, and God will not use our criticism as a help to change mindsets, for example.
Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.